Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ, the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at the New Mexico special election results, what they might mean for the Republican and Democratic parties, and what they mean for the midterms and beyond in terms of what we could expect in the next 2 to 4 years in terms of election trends. So this was a race that was closely watched by both Republicans and Democrats. And unfortunately for Republicans, this was a resounding defeat by the Democrat, Melanie Stansbury. In fact, she overperformed Joe Biden's margin in the district, and she also overperformed the last Republican nominee, Michelle Garcia Holmes, who ran in 2020 back in November. And we're going to take a look at the differences because this was pretty bad. Republicans expected to do a lot better. The Democrats did outspend the Republicans. I believe it's 8-1. Stansbury, of course, had the benefit of having the first gentleman campaign for her, Jill Biden, people like that, and of course a huge money advantage. Now, something to keep in mind, the 1st District of New Mexico is a safe Democratic district. So this district realistically was never going to go to the Republican Mark Moore's. However, the margin was what was really closely watched, because if Moore's had, say, gotten a lot closer, maybe overperformed Deb Haaland's opponent back in 2020, maybe got 42, perhaps even 43% of the vote, that would have been a really bad sign for Democrats. But Democrats not only held their own, they gained ground. Melanie Stansbury outperformed Deb Haaland from 2020. In fact, Deb Haaland only won this seat by 17. On the contrary, Melanie Stansbury has a nearly 25-point victory over her Republican opponent. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, I'm sure the independent and libertarian candidates probably didn't help Mark Moore's. I don't know why I keep calling him Michael Moore's. Maybe I'm thinking Michael Moore. But something to note about the third-party candidates, though, is that they were both generally right-leaning if you actually take a look at their policy platforms. Obviously, the Libertarian was more on the right, but Aubrey Dunn was also more sort of on the right. So it definitely split the right-wing vote in terms of overall percentage, and it ultimately hurt Moore's at the end of the day, and it hurt the GOP. So again, if we take a look at some of the areas where Republicans did worse, well, they essentially did worse in every part of the district. Of course, we have the Sandoval party part of the district, which Melanie Stansbury won 59-36. If we go back to 2020, that was 55-44. Now, again, something to keep in mind, though, before I continue, the turnout differential was massive. We have 321,000 votes in 2020. This time around, 131. Less than half the turnout that we saw back in November. So there wasn't a whole lot of votes coming here, but the Democrats were able to get their base out. Stansbury did much better in Bernalillo County, which is where Albuquerque is, 61-49. Of course, this time around, Haaland wins 59-40 in the general. I guess another thing to keep in mind, too, is that there was no third-party candidates. It was just the Republican or the Democrat. There were no other options. So that alone probably benefited the Republicans in that sense. Of course, Torrance County was 67-32, the margin that we saw back in November. This time around, just 54-33. Quite honestly, a terrible showing by the Republican, considering the margin that we saw back in the general election. Although, I guess you could say that if you were to add up all the third-party votes, it wouldn't have been as bad. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It took away from his votes. The Democrats overperformed. And that's a good sign for Democrats. I mean, if we just look at the district's history real quick, we saw 2020, 58-41, 59-36 back in 2018 for Democrats. And then, Michelle Lujan Grisham won pretty handily back in 2016, a 65-34 margin. And again, you could go back, but this district used to be relatively competitive. I would say as recently as 2010, it was, Republicans had a realistic chance of winning this district. And it was represented by a Republican for a very long time before this. But now the district is safe Democratic, and of course, again, it was supposed to be a gauge, a bellwether for Republican strength, I guess, in going into 2022, and it certainly didn't do that. So Republicans certainly not really enjoying this victory. Now, one of the trends we were looking at, of course, was whether the Latino vote would snap back in favor of the Democrats. And I mean, based on these results, it looks like they have, although something I would also bring up is that the turnout differential. Again, we have under half turnout. So it seems like there was low enthusiasm from either side. Obviously, the Democrats had more enthusiasm. 131,000 votes, though. That's around the same amount of votes that the Republican got in totality in the 2020 election. So Republicans, if they really wanted to, with a low turnout, could have won this race. Obviously, it would have been a very uphill battle because of the district leaning. However, it looks like, based on this result, Republicans are not going to do as well in 2022. But that's based on this result. Again, this is one House district in one state. You know, it could be down to the candidates, the third parties, what have you. But it certainly isn't. I'd say a more important bellwether for 2022 would certainly be the Virginia gubernatorial election, which is in November. If Republicans even make that close or outright win, I would say that's a very good sign for Republican enthusiasm across the country. But again, this one House seat alone probably doesn't indicate it. But all the indicators we've seen, I mean, post-2020, the special elections in Georgia, the runoffs, I mean, and this election really says that Democrats, even in off years, can be energized to vote if you give them a reason to. You know, back in January, the main reason was keeping Mitch McConnell out of the majority in the Senate, and it worked. It got tons and tons of Democrats out to vote for him, to vote for Ossoff and Warnock. So, you know, Democrats really do have the energy still. Again, this isn't as fair of a assessment, I suppose, because, again, this is one district in one state, which is already a safe blue state to begin with. So it is a bit skewed. However, Republicans were expecting to, you know, at least break 40 in this race. And, you know, the ad differential in terms of spending was huge. And yet, you know, the Democrats, they got the advantage. They overperformed in this race. If we look at, real quick, the 2020 House elections in general, and we take a look at the seats that flipped in favor of the Republicans and the Democrats, because the Democrats did flip some seats, there's a lot to break down, I guess, even from this result of what we could expect going into next year. Obviously, New Mexico's second stays in blue hands. We have New Mexico's first. New Mexico's second district. If I've been calling it New Mexico's second district this entire time, I meant to say the first. But a lot of these districts, obviously New Mexico's second, I expect to stay. But some of these districts, particularly Iowa's second, were very, very, very close. And in some cases, single digits, a few hundred votes separated the two candidates. What I think is really going to make or break Republicans' momentum in 2022 is whether the party remains unified behind a message. You know, when Republicans swept into power in 1994, they had the Contract with America, which was this whole, agreement of fiscal responsibility and stuff like that to counter kind of what they saw as the big spending liberal in the White House, Bill Clinton, back in 94. And of course, in 2010, you had the backlash from Obamacare, which saw just a bloodbath across the country in terms of Republican victories all over. In states you wouldn't expect, states like Illinois going red, Massachusetts in the special election. These are things that in today's partisan climate, I mean, and it was partisan back then, but especially now, seem basically impossible. You know, Massachusetts going red for a federal seat, you know, like a Senate seat or even a House seat is basically impossible in today's climate. And yet in 2010, Scott Brown was able to do it. So again, this is just a small election in a blue state, but I mean, it's not an encouraging result. It's certainly a very good result for Democrats, though, because it shows that they can drive out their base even in a low turnout election, which if for some reason 2022 is low turnout, they might not do so bad. You know, there are certainly not just the House, but also the Senate and, of course, the governor's races. But just looking at the House itself, we can't really, you know, pinpoint specific districts yet because redistricting hasn't happened yet. So we have no idea what the new maps are going to look like. We know that Montana is going to get another district. Rhode Island is going to lose a district. West Virginia is going to lose a district. Texas is going to gain 2. Florida is going to gain 1. New York's going to lose 1. PA is going to lose 1. I think Michigan might lose 1 too. So, again, it doesn't really build. If anything, I guess it only gives Republicans a 1 or 2 seat advantage. But I think their biggest advantage going into the 2022 midterms would probably be the fact that they could gerrymander districts. I mean, they have so many legislatures all across the country. They're probably going to use that power to benefit their own party and their own agenda. So I wouldn't be surprised if a state like Texas or Florida or Georgia is heavily gerrymandered. And again, something I would find interesting or something I want to look at next year is whether Republicans are going to be able to hold these suburban seats like Georgia's 7th district. Districts like Georgia's 6th, I don't think that's going to flip back. It was a monumental margin compared to just back in 2016. It was a safe red district, Georgia's 6th. It was the district of Newt Gingrich. And now it is effectively not safe, but about to be a safe Democratic district, really. I mean, unless, Republicans can do better in the suburbs, it's going to be really hard to build a really cohesive majority. I mean, Republicans, I would still say, are favored to win the House majority next year, but if Republicans don't make inroads in the suburbs, it's not going to be a very large majority, and it could be a majority that's overcome in the next general election or so. But that's really it, guys. That was just the breakdown of the New Mexico special election results and what they possibly mean for the rest of the country. And ultimately, like I said, it is just one district, but it's certainly, the signs are very encouraging for Democrats going into the midterms. So anyway, guys, thank you all for watching. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification. And as always, thank you all for watching. And I hope to see you in the next video.